the next measurement was never really talked about when I was bowling before. It was starting to get talked about, but it has become such a metric now that people they got to know their rev rate.
Yeah.
Like, I've never known my rev rate. I know that I put more on it than a lot of girls, but other than that, I don't know.
Right. So,
Like,
so a rev rate's important, right? We all hear it, right? We all watch the PBA telecast, and we all see the no thumb two-handed players with their 500 plus rev rate, throwing it, 20 miles an hour, throwing pins all over the place. And then, we equate high rev rate with strikes, which in today's game, high rev rate can equal more strikes, better carry, right? Knowing your rev rate is important because it's also going to help you with what you want to drill, how you want to drill it, and just matching, right? I think it's also important to know that rev rate isn't the only thing when we're talking about drilling a bowling ball. We also want to know what our ball speed is, and we want to be able to match ball speed and rev rate. Or we want to know if we're not matched, we want to know, are you rev dominant or are you speed dominant?
right.
Because if you're speed dominant, we may drill balls for you that are stronger, that are going to roll sooner because you're not going to need the help getting them down the lane.
Well, and like the house I'm bowling at now has old AS90 scoring, so there's no reading the speed from the deal. We have it off now, but here at least it tells us what the speed is.
Of course.
But how accurate is that? Because I know I've been in places and it's said I throw the ball way harder than I know I throw the ball.
Yeah, I think it just varies, right? I think the best thing to be would be you can actually calculate your speed from the time you release it to the time it hits the pins. And there's some different programs or different places on the web you can find that you can put those numbers in and it'll tell you what your overall ball speed is. The units on the score are different, right? They're measuring the speed down lane. They're measuring speed after the ball's slowed down. A lot of times when we're seeing speed on the PBA telecast and stuff like that, we're seeing the off the handball speed, or we're not seeing it as it's slowing down and getting to the pins.
Right. And I guess the point I brought that up is everybody talks about all these metrics and they think that they have to be like the pros. And you have to understand that math can be manipulated. So like
Correct.
you said, it's your speed off the hand versus speed down lane versus overall speed. Those are three completely different measurements. And depending on the angle you're playing the lane, that's going to also change.
100%.
I just don't want people to get caught up on, I have to throw it faster, I have to throw it slower,
Right.
or whatever, because every situation is unique.
Well, and I know you said you're gonna, go to a center in town that has Specto on it and throw some shots and do some
because I'm
things.
curious. I've never bowled with Specto. That technology didn't exist except
Right.
like at the training center.
Yeah, so we're gonna do your rev rate. We're gonna have this in this video. One thing I'd encourage you to do is when you're there, throw your spare ball down the middle of the lane and look at rev rate. Because again, math can be manipulated, right?
Yeah.
So a plastic ball going 20 miles an hour down the lane on Specto is going to measure a high rev rate because it's trying to do calculations based on revolutions and speed. So again, I believe Specto is a great tool. There's a lot of great things within that as well. But true rev rate is measured off of your hand through the first little bit of the lane, and we'll show everybody how we calculate that here in a second too.
Okay. Yeah, so let's get on with that.
Okay.
We've got the center line on this ball. So my understanding from what research I did is we're going to put tape across it so we have a nice, good, bright line to use as our baseline. Is that correct?
I want to put tape across it. And really at this point, what we're going to do is probably 2 or 3 pieces of tape so we have a nice big line that we'll see on the camera. Maybe 4 pieces. It just depends. So what we're doing now is we're just going to put tape on the ball. Again, we know your positive access point, so we can just put tape on your path. It doesn't really matter. All we're trying to do is see the ball go down lane.
So you're going away from the PAP? Are we also going to go away from the grip? Or are we also going to go toward the center of the grip? I just don't know how it's going to look out there. That's why I'm asking.
We're going to throw
I
a couple
haven't done
shots.
this before.
But really, what we're going to see is we're just going to see this tape rotating, and we're going to be able to pick it up on the camera to see how many times that tape rotates.
Okay.
So let's go throw a shot, make sure we can see the ball rotate, and then we'll take some video of the ball rotating down the lane. And I think just for visual purposes, doing this sometimes, like, masking tape is better, so we're not wasting our bowler's tape, but all right, there we go.
Okay, I just noticed you went across from the PAP, not on the center of grip. Does it matter?
No.
Okay, as long as there's a straight line.
As long as there's a straight line, we can see the tape rotating, we can pick it up on camera, we'll be fine. See, I'm watching Storm's video on it right now, and they're going from half outside the ball.
I wasn't sure.
Yeah, no worries.
You said it's a measurement I've never taken before?
So throw one more. I'm going to actually use a stopwatch on here.
Okay.
So Jen's getting video to help us identify her rev rate. We're also going to try to identify her ball speed off her hand to the head pin. So what we're going to do is we're just going to use any stopwatch. We're going to, once the ball's thrown off her hand, we're going to start it. And then once it hits the head pin, we're going to stop it. So as we can see in the video here, it took 2.77 seconds for her ball to get
help as well. Okay, so I was able to get the action camera footage in of that last shot.
Okay.
And I'll download the high-res one to my phone.
Okay.
And we can really zoom in on it.
Perfect. So while you were doing that, I pulled up just a web page that I've used in the past. It's a ball speed calculator, and took a video or took measurements how long it took from your ball to leave your hand to hit the head pin, which was 2.77 seconds. So that would equate to your ball speed overall was about 14.8 miles per hour.
Okay,
your overall ball speed.
I want to say these ones have been like in that right around that 15 range, so
okay,
that would
so
that
these
would
ones
be
are
in line.
calculating it pretty close, right?
Yeah.
And that's taken from the time it's off your hand to it hits the pin. So that's the ball's going to slow down as ball motion happens. The ball does have to slow down to get in its phases of skid, hook, roll. You know, the optimal phases for a bowling ball to roll and potentially strike. So, and that's good to know because there's other programs out there. There's there's ball chart calculators. So if we were to calculate the number of revolutions, so I know that we're downloading this edited footage, but we're downloading this for high resolution. But as we count the number of revolutions the ball makes all the way down the lane, so let's see if we can do that on this.
Yeah, we'll be able.
The video, and found that your ball rotates about 15 times all the way down the lane.
Okay.
So using the IPSIA ball chart and rev rate calculator, which I think is the easiest thing for somebody trying to do this, they can calculate their ball speed, they can calculate the number of revolutions. There's other ways where you can slow it down and you can take the first revolutions up to the arrows and you can get rev rate off your hand, which is also important. But just for our purposes, overall rev rate, if we look at, the chart has variance in ball speed, so it has 15.15 and 14.61, so we'll keep that in mind as we're looking at this with about 14 revolutions. That would put us in the 300 to 311 to 321 to 333 rev rate. So.
Okay, which I hear a lot of people talk around like the 350 to 400 range, so I'm not that far out of that.
No, you're not that far out of it. And I think, again, going back to the importance of making sure your ball speed and rev rates match, I think that's a good match number, which means you're going to be able to drill a lot more balls for performance and everything, where we were talking before, if your ball speed's high and your rev rate's low, you may need to drill stronger balls all the time that read the fronts to get you that extra little bit of help, right? Or if your ball speed's slow and your rev rate's high, you may have to drill weaker balls that are going to, you know, help
Okay.
you get that length. So I think it's a good exercise to go through for everybody out there. You know now what you know, and it's going to help you with
updating numbers, and then knowing numbers that, like I said, they weren't really talked about when I was really into the game before. They were just starting to really become like, everybody was all hyped up on getting more revs, but there wasn't really a lot of data out there on how do you know what you got without going to a facility like the IRTC and having them do it with their fancy stuff, which is becoming more readily available.
Right, yeah, fancy tools and everything are there, but you know, the ability to be able to do it yourself, to be able to just check on it, right? You know, there are ways to potentially increase rev rates, although I don't think there's any magical thing that's going to jump us up 40, 50, 60 revs unless you want to take the thumb out of the ball. Then, you know, maybe that would be something, but you know, at this point, it's
or release drills.
Release drills will help, strengthening up the wrist, you know, really working on that yo-yo type of activity.
So in short, to get the rev rate, you can use center of grip. You don't really necessarily need to know your PAP at that point, but it's still a good number to know. But you can use your center of grip, just line a tape across the ball that contrasts the color of the ball so you can see it clearly. Throw a few good shots and go to the chart.
Yeah, 100%. I would also say that it also would be advantageous when you're doing a contrasting tape to do another little contrasting piece at the end, because when the ball's rolling down the lane, you're going to see a line and it's going to circle, and as it gets further down the lane,
you may not know which way is up from down.
You may not know which way has rotated, right? So if you have another, like, say you're using white tape and you use like a little piece of neon green at the end, you'll be able to see that neon green thing and count the revelations a little bit easier.
Okay. Well, with my ball, thankfully, I use colored grips on the other side, so it's a little easier to see on that.
It's a little contrast, right? But as we're getting the ball down the lane on video,
old eyeballs,
you know, and even iPhones and Android phones and everything nowadays have great cameras, but as it gets further away from us and you're zooming it up, looking at it in slow motion, it's hard to count, right? So it's a good extra piece to do, but yeah, anybody could grab a ball, put a piece of tape on it, and video it, and know what their rev rate is potentially, as long as you're also calculating your ball speed, which again would be from the time the ball leaves your hand to the time the ball leaves the pins, and then using that IPSIA ball chart, somebody could then say, hey, Jason Belmonte has a 580 rev rate, and I have a 450. Like, I'm not that far off. Like you said, you're not that far off.
Yeah, from what I've heard people talk about with their numbers,